when I had a conversation with him later that day at camp, and I asked him why a player at his level was doing such basic drills, he said something to me that changed my life forever. He said, the reason I'm the best in the game is because I never get bored with the basics. And, here well over a decade later, that every time I tell that story, it still makes the hairs on my neck stand up because it was that impactful.
Welcome to Insights into Success. We're with your host, Paul Dodds. We hope to educate, inspire, and motivate you to achieve your own personal success. We talk to guests from all around the world from a variety of walks of life to hear the realities of their own journey to success. What challenges have they faced? How have they coped with failure? And what have been the keys or will be the keys to their own success? In our Read to Succeed interviews, we talk books that have inspired our guests, and for some, they share their secrets to marketing success. Join us as we give you insights into success. All right, well, welcome to Insights into Success. We're now in 2024, which is pretty scary. Time's going around very quickly. We've got a special guest today, Alan Stein Jr. Now, I don't actually want to announce what you do yet because I want that to come out through the story because I think you've got a really interesting journey. And it just kind of, from my point of view, highlights how you might start out in life and end up quite possibly in quite a different position than what you probably anticipated in the beginning. Through this, I'm sure people are going to learn a lot and find out that you had a very interesting journey. So just to kick us off, Alan, just tell us a little about where were you born? Where are you from?
I was born in a suburb of Washington, D.C., which is actually where I still currently reside. And outside of a brief stint at university in the late 90s, I've lived here my entire life. But I'm very grateful that I'm fairly well traveled and have been to, I believe, almost all 50 states in probably 24 different countries. So even though I've called this home for a long time, I'd love seeing the rest of the world.
Well, I think you should be quite proud that you've seen most of your states because I've done a bit of traveling in America, and I know from anecdotal conversations with people in America that I often am in the position where I've seen more of the states than what they have. So, that's good. And the thing about America is it's so diverse, and I think a lot of people in other countries don't appreciate the diversity in America. So, maybe it doesn't have quite the same diversity as Europe, but nonetheless, there is a lot of variation within the country, within the states.
There is. And that's actually one of my favorite parts of traveling is to see other cultures and to see that diversity and to see the way other people live and their rituals and I'm a big foodie and see what types of foods are native to different areas. And please know New Zealand is very high on my bucket list. I haven't been to New Zealand or Australia, and both are super high on my bucket list.
Oh, well, I'm sure it'll be worth your while. And I guess if you're going to come to this part of the world, it probably makes sense to see both. We are very different. I know people think we sound the same, that we're very similar. We do definitely have similarities, but we have a lot of differences, and definitely the geography is very different between the two countries. So, well worth the journey. So do you think there was anything in your childhood that has influenced where you have come to now? Like looking back to when you were just a young kid, is there anything that you can point to in your growing up that sort of had resulted in you being where you are now, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, two things jumped to mind immediately. The first was I fell in love with the game of basketball at a very early age. My parents signed me up for my first basketball team when I was 5 years old. And here I'm knocking on the door of 50 years old, and basketball is still a major pillar and passion of my life. So being introduced to something that I was so passionate about early certainly had a major influence. And then the other was, and it's kind of a dovetail off of that experience, was I had a middle school basketball coach define what he called the strength zone. And he said the strength zone, if you can kind of live and work and play in the strength zone, it's your best chance of not only performing at a high level, but also living a very enjoyable and fulfilled life. And he defined a strength zone as the intersection between something you're very passionate about and something you're naturally pretty good at. So, he encouraged, everyone that was at my age at the time in middle school to really find things that you love to do, find where your passion is, and then also find what your gifts and your talents are, where you're naturally pretty good at things, and then find where those two things intersect. And that point of intersection is your strength zone. And that's one piece of advice that I've kept with me my entire life. And as I've navigated a few different careers, I've always made sure to stay true to staying in my strength zone.
Yeah, and I think that's great advice, because the reality is, if you're passionate about something, it's a whole lot easier to, really go to whatever lengths to achieve whatever you want to achieve, because you've got that enjoyment factor. But it would be very hard to be really good at something if you didn't actually particularly like it, I would have thought.
Yeah, you said that perfectly, because to really be a high performer in any area of life, I mean, any industry, any vocation, any craft, you've got to be willing to put in the work. You've got to be willing to get the reps during the unseen hours. And as you just said so insightfully, that's not very sustainable if you don't actually enjoy the work, if you don't enjoy the reps, if you don't enjoy working on your craft. So there's no way you could have a long, thriving, sustainable, high-performing career if you loathed what you were doing. So I do think it starts with a passion and something you love. But I also don't want to neglect the importance of finding something that you have some natural affinity for.
Yeah.
At my age now, I'm very clear on the things that I do really well, but I'm equally clear on an even longer list of things that I don't do very well. And, and the reason I bring that up, if there is something that you're very passionate about, but maybe you don't have very, much natural talent for that thing, it's still something to pursue and enjoy as a hobby. It would just be hard to be a world-class performer in it.
For sure. Someone that actually springs to mind when you were talking before, having read about him, was Andre Agassi. I remember reading about him, hugely talented tennis player who did incredibly well. But you wonder, how much better he potentially could have been. Because I remember him talking about he came to hate tennis. He lost that enjoyment factor in it. And I mean, as soon as you do that, your performance has got to suffer. And like I said, I mean, he achieved a great deal. Don't get me wrong, but you do think, could he have achieved a lot more if he actually enjoyed tennis more than what he did? He came to dislike it, I guess, because he played it from such a young age and had so much pressure on him. He started to actually even, loathe the sport.
Absolutely, which is why one of the things I highly encourage all people to do is to have some sense of flow and harmony in your life, and don't kind of put all of your eggs in one basket. And even more importantly, try not to attach your personal identity to what it is that you do. Another piece of advice that I didn't receive until much later in life, but a very influential former basketball player said that the reason he was able to have a successful career after he retired was, and these were his words, he said, "Basketball is what I do. It's not who I am." He was able to separate who he was as a human being from his chosen field of expertise and his chosen craft, which meant when he stopped being a basketball player, he wasn't having this identity crisis. He was able to move into something else and still maintain that intersection of what he loved and what he was good at. So that's probably an issue with Andre Agassi. And we actually see this a lot in the States, is a lot of parents encourage their very young children to specialize many times in sport, but sometimes it can be in music or something else, to specialize super early to the tune of that's all that they do. When I'm a huge believer, especially at younger ages, that we need to have more range in what we do, and we need to try lots of sports and activities and see what we like. And, so to me, that burnout effect that you just mentioned with Andre Agassi is very real. And if you reach that point, you can start to loathe the thing that you originally loved.
Yeah, I wonder too, because other examples I think of would be Tiger Woods, the Williams sisters. They had parents that from a very young age pushed them into their particular sport and really focused on it. I wonder, do you think? I mean, from what I understand, at least anyway, they were very singular focused. They didn't really have a lot of breadth to their growing up and doing lots of other things in other sports. Do you think that people like that, if they had more diversity in their younger age, do you think it would have negatively impacted on their performance ultimately? What's
That's
your thought?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And those examples, I don't know. I mean, obviously, both Tiger and the Williams sisters, I mean, they ascended to the top of their field and their craft. I mean, you're talking about with all of them, I mean, legendary performers. So yeah, I don't know. It'd be pure speculation to say if Tiger Woods would have played multiple sports, would he still have been a world-class golfer? And I think there would need to be some balance there. I mean, one of the reasons he was so dominant and world-class was because he did have that singular focus and he was able to put in a ton of practice time. But do I think had he also played a little youth soccer and maybe played some basketball or, I don't think it would have necessarily detracted from him getting to that end result. Maybe he wouldn't have been the child prodigy that we all got to see. Maybe he wouldn't have been as good as early. But I still think he would end up getting there. But one thing we have to all remember, and I say this with a huge smile and all the compassion in my heart, Tiger Woods and Serena Williams, they're once in a generation athletes. They're the anomaly. They're not the average person. And, I'm the father of 3 kids. I have almost 14-year-old twin sons, and I have an almost 12-year-old daughter who I love dearly. And, I encourage them to try a lot of different things and play a lot of different things. Now, at present, they've chosen to focus solely on basketball, and they're at an age where I want to give them their autonomy and let them make those decisions. But, in all reality, I'm going to support and encourage and champion my kids with whatever they want to do. But I also have the humility to acknowledge that the chance of my 3 children being once in a generation Tiger Woods type athlete is probably fairly slim, and that's okay. It doesn't mean I love them any less. It just means with a stroke of reality. So I want them to do a lot of different things and really find their calling and find their passion in the same way that I've been able to.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you were a young kid growing up, was your initial desire to be a professional basketball player? Was that what you were thinking?
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. Now, true to everything I just said to you, while I loved basketball, throughout my entire youth, I did multiple sports. I mean, I played just about every sport under the sun, both team and individual sports, and did some kind of almost X game type sports. I mean, I was into skateboarding and BMX biking. I played football. I played soccer. I played baseball. I took martial arts. Like, I tried a lot of things. And because I tried a lot of things, I can say unequivocally that basketball won out and basketball was my favorite. But I was able to say that with confidence because I tried a lot of different things. And, basketball was always the constant. I'd get home from football practice and I'd go outside and I'd shoot some hoops. Or before I'd go to martial arts practice, I'd be working on my ball handling or working on my game. So basketball was the one thread that I enjoyed playing all of the time, but I still did a lot of different things.
Yeah, and I think that's great that you got to experience all those because, like you said, it really enabled you to reflect back and find your zone, what it is that you really like. And I mean, often, like, until you try other things, you don't know. You might be some obscure sport that you've never played, but you might actually get into it and actually really like it. So, at a young age, if you don't try, then how do you really know?
Yeah. Now, one thing I'll say, and I don't say this with regret. I only say it now with the life experience and the gift of hindsight. But I was very singularly focused as far as sport was concerned. Now, I tried every sport under the sun, but I never had any interest in music or in the arts or in acting or anything else. Like I was so I limited myself to just sport. And even with my own children, I'm trying to encourage them to, as much as I love youth sports and I want them to stay physically active and be a part of teams, I want them to consider looking at other things outside of traditional sport. Because for all I know, maybe I would have fallen in love with music or art or graphic design or acting or so who knows?
Yeah. Yeah. And so when you got to university, what was your goal at that point? What were you thinking you were going to do once you graduated?
Well, to answer your original question, yes, when I was younger, the goal was to be an NBA basketball player. But keep in mind that, since I'm almost 50 years old, when I grew up, this is pre-internet, pre-social media. So I had a very limited view of the world. So, when I was in elementary school and middle school, I'm thinking, hey, I'm the best basketball player at my school. That's got to be good enough to play in the NBA. And I didn't have any comparison to make. So it wasn't until I got to high school and then certainly got to college that I realized that, with all humility, I wasn't going to be a professional basketball player, that, my talent and my athleticism and my skill would only take me to the collegiate level. And that was something I was very proud of. But I knew at that point the NBA was not going to be calling my name. So I decided to make a shift, and I still wanted to stay in my strength zone. And I decided to become a basketball performance coach. At the time, it was a strength and conditioning coach. The name has kind of expanded because performance coaches today help players with a lot more than just strength and just conditioning. But I knew I wanted to stay close to the game. I knew I wanted to coach and to motivate and to teach. And while I was in college, I started to find a love for things like lifting weights and plyometrics and agility drills and conditioning and mindset and nutrition. So when I graduated in the late 90s, I figured what could be better than taking my first love of basketball and combining it with this newfound love of strength and conditioning. And I decided to become a basketball strength and conditioning coach.
Now, I know you had probably, well, I know from my research you've had at least two pivotal moments in your life. And the first one that I read about was when you were helping school, fifth grade children. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I thought that was an interesting story.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So for a little more context, both of my parents were elementary educators. My mom was a first grade teacher for 30 years. My father started as an elementary school teacher and then went into administration and became a middle school principal. So I'd always grown up in a household that valued education. And I had both of my parents model for me that they chose a vocation that they really loved and found enjoyment in. They found a higher calling in pouring into young people. And, as I was getting older and realized that I was not going to be an NBA basketball player, I wasn't really sure at that time what I wanted to do. So I just figured I'd follow in my parents' footsteps and become a teacher. But my real plan was to teach, but to be a basketball coach. And I realized that, at least here in the school systems in the United States, the overwhelming majority of high school coaches are also teachers. So I realized those two things were kind of locked in tandem, and I needed to become a teacher in order to become a coach. But I found out very quickly my passion was much more for basketball coaching than it was for teaching. And that moment that you mentioned, during my sophomore year of college, I was doing my student teaching with some fifth graders, and the teacher had an assignment for the students that I needed to help them with that required them to go outside and collect some leaves that had fallen off the trees and laminate them and kind of find out what tree they came from. And I just realized in that moment, I have no desire to know anything about leaves. And I certainly don't want to spend a 30-year career teaching other people the importance of leaves if I don't even find any importance in it. And I say that with a smile because I have so much reverence and I value and respect teachers at every level. And I'm not saying that there is anything wrong with being a fifth grade teacher or that there's anything wrong with teaching the curriculum, which included teaching about leaves. I just know that wasn't for me. And I literally left that class and I went straight to my advisor and said, I can't do this. I'm not passionate about leaves. I think I used some more colorful language, to be honest, and said, I need to find something else to do because this is not what I'm going to spend my life doing. And he put me on a new course where I ended up becoming a sport management major, which worked out brilliantly for me because I took half business classes and half exercise phys classes, which when I ended up starting my own training company and working with basketball players, that worked out to be one of the best decisions I ever accidentally made.
And I think that comes back to your advice from your coach in your younger years about the intersection between what you're good at and your passion. Obviously, with that experience, you realized that you weren't passionate about being a elementary school teacher. So you're never going to be that good at it or as good as you could be at something because you didn't have the passion to back it up.
Exactly. Well said. And one thing that I also learned that my parents modeled for me, and I still believe to this day, teaching in particular, but coaching also, you were there in service of others. In this case, you were in service of young people. Like it is literally your job to help groom the future of the world. And that's not something that you can just go through the motions with, or not something you can just kind of mail in. Like, you need to love teaching and love young people. And in this case, love leaves and love fifth grade curriculum, if that's what you're going to choose to do with your life. There's a lot of other jobs where I guess you could just show up to an office, work in a cubicle, and just kind of do what you're supposed to do. But teaching, to me, is not one of those jobs. Teachers need to love their work and need to love pouring into young people. And as soon as I realized that I was not going to love teaching, at least not to the degree my parents did, then that was an easy switch for me.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So once you left university, then what did you do?
When I left university?
Yeah, once you graduated.
I moved back. So the college that I went to was in North Carolina, which was about 4.5 hours from where I grew up in the DC area. I moved back to the DC area and began an internship working for a trainer who was training a lot of NBA basketball players. And I figured out, I guess through some common sense, that one of the best ways to get where you're trying to go is to learn from someone that is either currently doing that or has done that previously. So at the time, I thought that I wanted to work with NBA players. So I figured, why not learn from someone that's currently doing that? So I ended up coming back and being kind of an intern / apprentice for about a year and kind of learn what it would take to train NBA players. And through that process, I also started to realize that training NBA players might not be the target that I should be aiming for. I actually found a lot more enjoyment working with middle school and high school age players. I found at that age, they were way more impressionable, both on and off the court, and I could have a much bigger impact in their lives as kind of a role model. So I ended up spending most of my basketball training career focused on youth, middle school, and high school age players, and that afforded me some opportunities to work with some NBA guys, which was an amazing experience. But most of my work was at the younger ages, and I found a lot of purpose and calling in that as well.
Now, I know that you ended up getting picked up by Nike and were flown around to help with some of their stars. And there was what I consider another pivotal moment with Kobe Bryant. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Be happy to. Yeah, this was in 2007. So this would have been 8 years after I kind of started my basketball training career and I had left college. And Nike flew me out to Los Angeles to work what they were calling the Kobe Bryant Skills Academy. They were building a series of camps to really teach the fundamentals and teach the game the right way to the top high school and college players in the country. And, as someone who's been a basketball fan my whole life, I just had so much admiration and respect for Kobe and believed he was the best player in the world in 2007. So I was really excited for the opportunity. And, when I was there, I got a chance to watch one of his really early morning workouts. And I remember as a relatively young coach, being so surprised at the fact that he was doing very basic drills really early in the morning. I expected to see a player at his level, doing some stuff with some flash and some sizzle and some sexiness and some really advanced drills, but he wasn't. He was just drilling down on the basics over and over. And when I had a conversation with him later that day at camp, and I asked him why a player at his level was doing such basic drills, he said something to me that changed my life forever. He said, the reason I'm the best in the game is because I never get bored with the basics. And, here well over a decade later, that every time I tell that story, it still makes the hairs on my neck stand up because it was that impactful. And I realized in that moment that just because something is basic, it doesn't mean it's easy. A lot of people use those words as if they're synonyms, as if they're interchangeable, but they're not. They don't mean the same thing. Just because something is basic, it doesn't mean that it's easy. And if it was easy, everyone else would be doing it. So that really became, from that day forward, that kind of became the foundation to which the rest of my house was built. Like, that's the foundation of my philosophy. It's the foundation of my approach to every area of my life, whether it's parenting or whether it's the other areas that I'm working in, is get crystal clear on what the basics are and what the fundamentals are, and then work towards mastery of those relentlessly during the unseen hours. And that's true for a player like Kobe Bryant in basketball, but it's literally true for each and every one of us in any area or vocation of our lives.
Yeah, now tell me about that, because you've obviously started out in the sporting world, but at some point you've come to realize about the parallels between sport and the business world. And it's something that I've always, struck me is that a lot of the qualities required to be good at sport are also potentially qualities required to be good in business. So I think if I recall correctly, you were asked to do a couple of speeches or a couple of talks, and it was through that in the business environment that you started to sort of see the parallels, and it's helped shift your business focus. Can you sort of elaborate on that a little bit?
You are 100% correct on that. So after a 15+ year career as a very dedicated basketball performance coach, I started to experience some burnout. Maybe not quite Andre Agassi level burnout, but I didn't find myself loving being in the weight room and being on the court. I didn't find myself as fascinated or as curious by coming up with new training programs and so forth. And because what I mentioned earlier, that I'm a big believer that teachers and coaches need to be all in, heart, mind, body, and soul. It is not a vocation that you can just mail in. And when I started realizing that I just wasn't loving basketball training anymore, I knew I needed to make a switch and needed to try something different. And around that same time, as fate would have it, a friend of mine, his company was looking for a motivational speaker, and he thought that I would do a pretty good job with that. So he asked me to speak to their group, and I did. And I mean, it was almost like these fireworks went off in my mind. I felt so alive. I felt invigorated, and it was clear to me that speaking was going to be the next iteration of my life. It was going to be the next strength zone that I needed to dive into. So in 2017, I left the basketball training world and I became a full-time professional keynote speaker or motivational speaker, and have been doing that ever since. And it's crazy, as you said at the beginning of the show, that we're already in 2024. It's hard to believe that I'm going into my 8th year in speaking, because part of me feels like I'm just getting started, but I absolutely love it. And yes, I draw on the lessons and the disciplines and the mindsets and the strategies and the perspectives and the approaches that I learned from the game, from players like Kobe Bryant and some of the other coaches and players that I worked with. And I now take those lessons and I apply them to business. And I show businesses, both large and small, in every type of industry imaginable, internationally as well. I teach them how to apply those same fundamentals so that they can improve in business.
Yeah. Now, so you've written a couple of books, and the first book I want to talk about is Raise Your Game. And there's some great stuff in it. I really, really enjoyed reading about that. So I just want to talk about that. So you talk about in Raise Your Game that you need to master self-awareness, passion, discipline, coachability, and confidence. Can you talk me through that? I think they're all absolutely fantastic, but can you tell me a bit more about that?
Be happy to. Well, let's focus primarily on self-awareness. That was chapter number 1 by design, because I really believe self-awareness is where everything starts. I know this analogy has become somewhat cliche, but it's also incredibly true. And that's the analogy of a GPS, of any type of system you use to find directions and to get where you're going. And, when you have a GPS in your phone, it only needs to know 2 coordinates. That's all it needs to know. It needs to know where you are in this moment, and it needs to know where you're trying to go. Yeah. That's it. It doesn't need to know where you were yesterday or 5 months ago. It doesn't need to know where you might want to be 3 weeks from now. It needs to know where you are today and where you're trying to go. And I believe we all need those coordinates. The where you are today is the self-awareness piece. You need to have an inventory of yourself and be reflective enough to know a whole bunch of things about yourself, but you need to know what it is you do well. You need to know what your strengths and your talents and your gifts are. You need to know what your goals and your ambitions are and what your purpose is and what you're passionate about. But you also have to have courage to look on the other side of the curtain, and you have to know what your weaknesses are, your opportunities for growth, your fears, your insecurities, the things that are holding you back, belief systems that might be limiting you. And once you have that total collage of both of those, then and only then do you have an accurate representation of where you are in the world at present. But I think it's equally important to have some direction on where you're going. And for me, I don't worry so much about a destination or a specific achievement or goal. It's more about who is the person I'm trying to become. And without getting too granular, I want the future Alan Stein Jr. to be physically, mentally, and emotionally fit. I want the Alan Stein Jr. to have a strong connection with his kids and his family, excuse me, and his clients, people that are important to him. I want the future Alan Stein Jr. to be doing work he considers meaningful and in service of other people. So that's the person that I'm continually striving to become. So I need to know where it is I am now and how well I'm doing those things. And I need to know the person I'm trying to become. And then I'm trying to design a life that puts me on the path to do that and to live in alignment with that. So that all of that starts with self-awareness.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's a great point. And the reality is, I think most of us just kind of float through life and don't ever really sort of pause and take stock and really analyze ourselves and do what you're suggesting. But if we do, then obviously we can benefit significantly, but most of us don't do that.
Agreed. And that's where I think self-awareness is a great starting point. And keep in mind, self-awareness is being able to acknowledge the things that you do well, the things you should be proud of and double click on, but it's also being able to acknowledge the areas where you can continue to grow. And that's really important. And really the key to self-awareness is making sure that you're not delusional, that the way you see yourself is the same way the rest of the world sees you.
Right.
So, if you were to ask someone, a friend of yours, are you a good listener? And they say, yes, I'm a great listener. But then you ask the 4 or 5 people that know them the best, and they all say, oh no, he's an awful listener. It's like talking to a rock. That would mean that person has very low self-awareness. They're not aware of the fact that listening is an opportunity for growth. Whereas if you were to ask that same person in the same series of people, and they said, you know what, I'm not a very good listener. It's something I'm aware of and need to really work on because I know that it would help me improve my relationships. That would show a very high sense of self-awareness. So self-awareness is not about just knowing what you do well. It's also having the courage to acknowledge the areas that you don't.
Yeah, no, for sure. And so the second one we've already really touched on is passion. The importance, I guess, of passion in what you're doing and how that will help facilitate you achieving your goals.
Yeah, passion's really just, you can call it purpose, you can call it your calling, you can call it your love. It's something that you find very meaningful, something that you find enjoyment from, something that you're curious and you're fascinated about. When those things all start to line up, then it's something that you'd be passionate about. And you hit the nail on the head at the very beginning of this conversation. The reason that is so important is if you're pursuing something that you simply don't enjoy and aren't passionate about, it's just too hard to put in the required work to be good at it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Now, the third one, discipline. Do you think that's one that a lot of us fall down on, the vast majority fall down on, lack of discipline?
It is. And it's because of the stories that we tell ourselves. I mean, without sounding too cliche or sound like I'm trying to speak in tweets, but discipline for the most part is just doing what you said you would do, long after the mood at which you said it has passed. Discipline's about, doing the best you can with what you have wherever you are. Discipline is making hard decisions, but making the right decision, not necessarily what's easiest. And discipline's doing what you're supposed to do, even when you don't feel like it, even when it's not convenient, even when you don't want to. But the most important part for folks to understand, and this is where I think some people get off the rails, is discipline is a choice in the moment. It's not a preset default. It's not like eye color or hair or height, which there's some genetic limitations on, because I hear people say things all the time like, well, I'm just not a disciplined person. Yeah. It's like, but that's not very accurate. That's a story that you're telling yourself. And you may have plenty of evidence from the past that supports that story, but it's not an inherent truth. The very next decision you have to make today, maybe it's what to post on Instagram or what to eat for lunch or whether or not to go for a workout. The very next decision you have the ability to choose the more disciplined path. And when you start to do that consistently, you'll start to rewire the story you tell yourself, and you'll start to tell yourself, hey, I am a disciplined person. Neither one of those is true, but it's the momentum and it's the power we give it through the story. So I do consider myself a disciplined person because I have conditioned that muscle to make disciplined decisions in most areas of my life consistently. Now, by no means am I perfect, and I'm certainly not batting 1,000 or getting straight A's, but in most areas of my life, I make mostly disciplined decisions, and it's a huge sense of pride for me.
Yeah. And I think you touched on this before, self-limiting beliefs. So if you believe that you're not disciplined, then you're automatically giving up and going, okay, well, I'm just accepting it. I'm not even going to try and follow through and do these things because that's not part of who I am. You've already lost.
Absolutely. And that self-talk is so important. And that is a big part of discipline. So the stories we tell ourselves and the voice inside our head are arguably the most important things that we'll ever say. And we need to make sure we speak to ourselves in a kind, compassionate, empowering way.
Now, the next one I think is a really, really interesting point. It's coachability. And I was thinking about that and how true that is about you being in the right mindset, that you're willing to listen, open yourself up and listen to feedback from others. I reflect on myself and I'm doing something outside my podcasting. I'm doing something very different now. And I can honestly say that I'm very open to coachability right now. I'm a sponge. I want to learn from all these people that know a lot more in this area than what I do. But in the past, doing other things, probably the coachability figure would be pretty low, sort of more of, I know what I'm doing. I'm not going to listen to other people. What do they know? But tell me a little bit more about that. I think it's just such a great point.
Well, I think we share that sensibility. And in fact, I think if most people are honest, they become more coachable as they get older because they have more life experience and a little more wisdom. I do think it's kind of a natural rite of passage for many of us, especially in our teenage years and early 20s, to think we know more than we actually know. And I know that was certainly true for myself. For me, coachability and humility go hand in hand. Humility is what allows you to stay open to being coached. Humility is what allows you to be open to feedback. Humility is what allows you to say, I'm getting pretty good at this, but I'm not as good as I'm capable of. So I want to stay open and I want other people to pour into me. I want to read the books and listen to the podcasts and watch the videos and take the courses and have people pour into me from all different directions so that I can continue to improve. One of the things that unites almost all human beings on the planet is we're happiest and most fulfilled when we're growing, when we're learning, when we're progressing. And in order to do that at a very rapid rate, we have to stay open to being coached. And that's been a common thread amongst all of the high performers I've ever been around, including somebody like a Kobe Bryant, who was a true master at his craft, but he still remained open to learning better ways and still remained open to his coaches.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the fifth one was confidence. Seems a pretty obvious one, but talk to me a little bit about that one.
Yeah, confidence is an interesting one. Confidence comes from a few different areas, some of which we've already touched on. Confidence, it comes from demonstrated performance. It comes from showing ourselves that we are competent in a certain area. And we get that competence by demonstrating that we can do it. And we do that in practices and workouts and rehearsals, even when the bright lights are on. So we need to constantly try and put ourselves in positions where we can actually feel some success, where we can feel some of that progress and some of that growth. Confidence also comes from that little voice in our head that we just mentioned, the self-talk. If your self-talk is empowering, and even when you miss a key shot or you lose that sale or, whatever it may be, how do you talk to yourself when you make a mistake or when there's adversity or when there's a challenge? If you pile on the shame and the guilt and you're extra critical of yourself, that will lower your confidence. Whereas if you're more compassionate and kind and thoughtful and understanding to yourself, your confidence will raise. And I believe in holding myself and others to an incredibly high standard of excellence. So this is not about saying it's okay that, you underperformed or that you didn't play well. It's just about having a compassion for that. Confidence also comes from keeping our word to ourselves. If you tell yourself tomorrow morning, I'm going to get up at 6 a.m. and I'm going to go for a jog. If you follow through on that, your confidence will increase. If you wake up in the morning and you hit the snooze alarm and pull the covers over your head and say, I don't feel like running, you'll remember that you broke that promise to yourself and your confidence will start to decline. So confidence is like self-awareness. It's not a constant. It's something that kind of ebbs and flows. There are some days that I am more confident than other days. There are some areas of my life that I'm way more consistently confident in than I am in other areas. And that part's okay.
And what's your tips on controlling that inner voice? Because that inner voice can have so much impact on how you see life. So, yeah, got any sort of tips on how best to control that?
Sure. It's not that you can necessarily control it. It's that you can decide what to listen to. I mean, we don't necessarily control our thoughts, but we do have more control and influence over whether we listen to our thoughts or what to do with those thoughts. So, if you miss a game-winning shot and your initial thought is, oh my God, I suck. I can't believe I missed that. You can't really control that was the thought that you had in that moment, but you absolutely control whether or not to give that story power and whether or not to listen to it, and you can kind of talk to yourself in a compassionate way. Like, hey, there I go again. I'm starting to be critical of myself. This isn't going to help me. I need to think in a different way or give more power to a different narrative or to a different story. But we all have that inner voice. And just like anything else, we need to slowly train it and condition it to tell ourselves stories that are more in our favor instead of stories that are degrading us.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, in your book, you also talk about 3 other things you need to focus on: habits, mindset, and you focus on being in the moment. Can you just talk us through that? Because I think that's interesting too, starting off with habits.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So habits are the things we do consistently and the things we do unconsciously. And, we want to try to stack habits that serve us and move us in the right direction. I don't know that there's anyone alive, and most certainly not me, that has 100% perfect habits. And I don't even know that we could define a habit as that anyway, but we want to go back to that GPS coordinates. Like, where am I trying to go? Who am I trying to become? And where am I now? And what are the things that I can do habitually every single day of my life, and to the point that they're on autopilot, that will reduce the friction of me getting there? What are the things that I can do that will empower me to be the person I'm trying to become? I mentioned as part of that, for me, I want to be physically, mentally, and emotionally fit. Well, what type of habits will lend itself to being physically, mentally, and emotionally fit? Well, just the physical portion. I have the habit of prioritizing my sleep and getting proper rest. I have the habit of eating clean, eating healthy, nutritious food most of the time. Not all of the time, most of the time. I work out consistently and I move my body most days of the week. So I've tried to groove a series of habits that are in alignment with being physically fit. The next one you mentioned is mindset, which is simply how we choose to view the world. And I'm a big believer in adopting what I call the winner's mindset, which is choosing to do the best you can with what you have wherever you are. No excuses. You don't blame. You don't complain. You hold yourself fully accountable for every area of your life and every aspect of your performance and how you show up, and just do the best you can with what you have where you are. A lot of people have set their default to blaming, complaining, and making excuses. And I can speak in the first person on that, because in my younger years, not only did I think or thought I knew everything, I was also the king of blaming, complaining, and making excuses. Anytime something didn't go my way or my preferences weren't met, it was someone else's fault or there was a reason for it. And it wasn't until I became older that I started to adopt an attitude of extreme ownership and full accountability. And then the third one you mentioned is being in the present moment. And that's simply learning how to be where your feet are. It's not getting distracted by the past, and it's not getting anxious about the future. It's being fully invested in the moment in front of you. And in order to win the moment, you have to be in the moment.
Now, you've written a follow-up book, and I think it's just a perfect follow-up book, because your first one being Raise Your Game. You think, okay, right, I'm going to read this book, and if I adopt the lessons in it, I'm going to lift my game, whether in sport or in business, whatever. But then the challenge is, okay, how do I keep going? And of course, you've then written your follow-up book, Sustain Your Game. So I thought it was a perfect follow-up, because, I mean, you get your lessons from your first book, and it's like, okay, but where to now? So can you talk us through the Sustain Your Game book and the lessons from that?
Be happy to. So as we're all constantly and consistently trying to elevate our game and raise our game, it's been my experience that there's three things that become roadblocks and speed bumps and undermine our ability to do that. And that was really the premise of Sustain Your Game. And that's our stress, stagnation, and burnout. Stress that we feel kind of in the moment when we're feeling frazzled and we're feeling overwhelmed and we're trying to resist what's going on around us. Stagnation is when we kind of put on the cruise control and we just get complacent with the way things are and we're not really growing or getting any better. And then burnout, something that we mentioned earlier with myself and with Andre Agassi, is when you no longer find a sense of passion or purpose or enjoyment or curiosity in the work that you're doing. So all three of those things are things that I have struggled on and off with my entire life and my entire career. And for me, with both books, and as I slowly start working on a third book at present, I'm always trying to write the book that I need to read myself. I find it somewhat therapeutic and liberating to write about the very things that I either want to learn more about or the things that are giving me trouble. So, I'm on a constant journey and a personal quest to continually raise my game in every area of my life, hence the first book. And then I found that what was, making that much more difficult was my inability to manage stress, avoid stagnation, and beat burnout. So that was really the impetus for the second book.
And can you give us insight into what the third book's going to be about?
It's funny you say that because I'm not 100% sure yet. I'm in the process of kind of collecting the things that I find most fascinating at present, the things that I'm really intrigued by, but I'm also doing the same exercise I just mentioned. I'm trying to find out the areas of my life where I know that I'm struggling and that I'm finding challenge. And I'm kind of researching and putting a lot of these things together, and then they'll slowly start to take shape and take form. When I originally was writing Raise Your Game, I had the idea of writing kind of a trilogy, and Sustain Your Game would be book 2, and then there'd be a third pillar. But I don't know that that's the route I'll go with my very next book. It might be a one-off from that, or it might be in a different direction. I don't know that I'll ever complete the trilogy, but that could be something I could look back or look later and look back on and decide to do. So I'm not 100% sure yet. I'm really in kind of the initial research stage.
And do you ever read your own books? Do you ever flick through the book to remind yourself on anything at all? Does that happen? Or
I've never sat down and read the book cover to cover since I recorded the audiobooks for each, because when I recorded the audiobook, I'm literally in a recording studio and I have to read my own book to myself to record it. But, but when I was working with my publisher and my editor and my co-author, John Sternfeld, I would read and reread and rewrite and edit a certain chapter dozens of times before it became finalized. So, I have read the entire book in a variety of different ways, but I haven't actually picked it up and read it cover to cover since then.
Do you think the process of writing the book and then going and doing lectures and and teaching others, it helps you to learn as well?
Oh my goodness, absolutely. I mean, that might be one of my favorite parts of the work I do is I try and live in alignment with everything I preach. I mean, everything I share on stage and everything I share on page are principles and strategies and lessons that I believe in. And I want to hold myself to that same standard. The last thing I want to do is tell people to do something that I'm not doing myself. Now, with that being said, I'm not coming from a place of mastery. I'm by no means saying that I have mastered everything that is in both of those books, but I'm working towards that. I'm aware of that. I have the goals and the drive and the ambition to continually level up in all of these different areas. So I give myself the grace and space to make mistakes and to be human and to be flawed and to be fallible. But my goal is to live in alignment with what I teach. In fact, one of my biggest fears, and I don't mean fear like it keeps me up at night, but one of my biggest fears would be I come to New Zealand to give a speaking engagement and I share with 500 people on stage. And then later that night at the hotel, one of the audience members sees me saying or doing something that is not in alignment with what I shared on stage. That by definition would make me a hypocrite. And I don't want to be that person. I'm, again, as I said, I'm allowed to have bad moments, and I'm allowed to say and do things that might not be my best self. We're all going to make mistakes, but generally speaking, everything I say on stage and everything I write on page are the exact ideals that I try to live up to.
Yeah. And so, like, if you were to teleport yourself back to a younger version of yourself, say a teenager, and you're able to look forward, obviously, and knowing what you were to achieve, what do you think as your younger version of yourself you would have thought about the career that was about to unfold for you?
It's an interesting one because my younger self, I don't think in a million years would have thought that I'd become a keynote speaker, a motivational speaker. In fact, in my really younger ages, I don't even think I knew that that was a viable job. It wasn't until I started to get into high school and college where folks like Zig Ziglar and Brian Tracy and Jim Rohn and Les Brown, kind of the godfathers of the self-development and personal development and self-help space, kind of started to take form. Yeah, I would have never in a million years thought this was what I would be doing, which makes it kind of fun looking back.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's an example of, they talk about sliding doors, how moments in your life can be so pivotal and how things could be so dramatically different just because of a choice in one moment. And I think of you and, how your life has taken all these really interesting twists and turns. And I just think if I was a young person looking forward and having the career that you'll have, whether or not I have the maturity to really appreciate it, it's just like, wow, this career that's going to unfold is so much more depth to it and dynamics to it than what you envisage as a kid. You think, okay, well, I'm going to go out and be a good basketball player or whatever, and it's very linear, very simplistic. But you consider what your life has unfolded. It's been, anything but simplistic and linear.
Absolutely. I think that's the perfect big red bow tie to put on the conversation. You're so right there. And we never know that in advance. We only can figure those things out looking backwards. But now, because of that experience, like, I absolutely love what I do right now. I love being a keynote speaker. And I don't for any reason foresee that changing, at least in the immediate future. But I also know that I don't know what I don't know. And I don't know how I feel or what I'll want to do 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now. So all I know is that I will stay true to that strength zone. And if it's in the cards for me to continue to be a keynote speaker for the next 30 years, that's wonderful. As long as I'm still finding enjoyment and passion in that, that's great. But if I wake up 10 years from now and I decide that I want to pivot again and try something different, I'll have the courage and hopefully the skill sets and mindset to be able to do that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it makes life interesting too. You don't do the same thing all your life. I think that's terribly boring when you hear of people that have the same career their whole life. I'm like, I'm not wired that way. I couldn't be like that. I've got to keep learning. I've got to keep doing different things, challenging myself. So otherwise I'd just be bored out of my brain, I think.
Agreed.
Well, Alan, thank you so much. I have to say that you really should come to New Zealand. I don't know about Australia, but I guess Australia, and speak, because what you have to share is relevant across the world. It's not specific to America. It applies to all of us. And you're super interesting to talk to. And when I, sort of looked on your website and reading about you, it's just kind of like makes you want to read and learn more and more. So, I don't know how it works to get you over here, but definitely I think you'd be well received if you came over and talk to people over here, because you've got a lot to share.
Well, nothing would make me happier. That'd be really cool. Well, I'm sure you have an international audience that follows and watches and listens to what you do. If anybody listening right now or watching is in New Zealand and you have a business or a sports team or an organization and you resonated with the stuff that we talked about today, you can just go to my website, alansteinjr.com, and hit the contact button and reach out to my team and we'll get back to you. I think it'd be really cool for me to come and learn about the New Zealand culture and cuisine and see everything that you all have going on, and then being able to share some of these principles and strategies. So if that's something someone's interested in, that would be great. And I'm also very accessible and responsive on social media. So feel free to follow along at Alan Stein Jr. on Instagram or Twitter. I'm also easily found on LinkedIn and have a YouTube channel. And then, as was mentioned, I've got 2 books, Raise Your Game and Sustain Your Game, which you can get on Amazon or Audible or wherever you like to get books. But this was a really fun conversation. You asked great questions. You certainly did your research and your homework, which I appreciate. So this was very enjoyable for me.
No, it was fantastic. And we will be, when we publish it, we'll publish all your links as well. But one thing for you, a little bit of homework you may be interested in, is we have a sports team here called the All Blacks.
Oh, I'm very familiar. I read that book, and the book was phenomenal. I think it was called Legacy. And
yeah,
absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, we continue to be the most successful team in the world, I think, across all sports. Although
Yes.
we didn't win the last World Cup, unfortunately. World Cups we seem to not do quite as well as we should relative to our overall success. But yeah, I just think of them, and I think of you, and the parallels there and that too. And I'm sure you would have a lot to share with the All Blacks too. So yeah, it'd be interesting.
That would be an honor. So if anyone listening, if you're in any way involved with the All Blacks, please reach out. That would be a dream too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, Alan. Well, I know you've promised to stay on for Read to Succeed. For people listening, we're going to record a separate little interview where we're going to talk about books that Alan reads. But for the moment, thank you so much, Alan. It's been an absolute pleasure. You've been one of the most enjoyable guests I've had on the show. And very much like to stay in touch. And if I can find anyone of relevance to try and get you over here, I'd love to try and see that happen, because I think you're a fantastic person to talk to. And I'm sure you'll be an amazing speaker.
Well, thank you so much. This was fun.